New at noon, NASCAR announced its commissioner will resign after more than 20 years in the racing business. Steve Phelps made a personal decision to step away, according to NASCAR.
Steve Phelps did not expect his time at the top of NASCAR to end this way. One moment he was leading the sport through its most powerful era. The next, his own words were being read in a courtroom, changing everything. This is the story of how NASCAR's first commissioner lost control, and why the fallout still matters today. For years, he was one of the most powerful figures the sport had ever seen, a man who climbed through the organization, helped shape modern NASCAR, and eventually became its first ever commissioner. His voice mattered, his decisions carried weight, and for a long time his authority went largely unquestioned. That all changed in the courtroom. In late 2025, NASCAR found itself fighting a federal antitrust lawsuit that exposed more than just business disagreements. It pulled back the curtain on how the sport's leadership talked behind closed doors. It revealed how fragile relationships between NASCAR and its team owners had become. And at the center of it all was Steve Phelps. By January 2026, the outcome was clear. Phelps would step down as commissioner. Officially, it was described as a resignation. Unofficially, many inside the sport saw it as the end of a leadership era that had become impossible to defend. To understand why this moment matters, you have to understand who Steve Phelps was to NASCAR. Phelps joined the organization in the early 2000s and steadily rose through the ranks. He worked in marketing, sponsorship, and media strategy. He played a key role in expanding NASCAR's national footprint and modernizing how the sport presented itself to fans and sponsors. When Brian France stepped aside amid controversy, Phelps emerged as a steady figure who promised stability. In 2020, NASCAR named him commissioner, a newly created role designed to give the sport a more professional and centralized leadership structure. Phelps was positioned as the public face of NASCAR, the man who would navigate a changing sports landscape while keeping teams, drivers, and owners aligned. For several years, that image held. Then came the charter war. The NASCAR charter system was introduced as a way to give teams long-term security. In theory, it created stability by guaranteeing race entries and offering financial value similar to a franchise model. In practice, it became one of the most divisive issues in the sport. Team owners argued that NASCAR retained too much control. They claimed the revenue split was unfair and that the charter agreements limited their ability to grow. Tensions simmered for years, but they reached a breaking point when negotiations over new charter terms stalled. Two teams decided to fight back. 23XI Racing, co-owned by Michael Jordan and Denny Hamlin, along with Front Row Motorsports, filed a federal antitrust lawsuit against NASCAR. The lawsuit accused the organization of using its power to suppress competition and force teams into unfavorable agreements. This was not a minor dispute. It was a direct challenge to how NASCAR operated. As the case moved forward, internal communications became evidence. Text messages and private exchanges were subpoenaed. What emerged shocked many within the industry. Steve Phelps's private messages became public. During negotiations, Phelps had sent text messages referring to veteran team owner Richard Childress in deeply derogatory terms. The language was personal, dismissive, and inflammatory. Once those messages were revealed in court filings, the reaction was immediate. Richard Childress is not just another owner. He is a Hall of Famer, a former driver, a team owner whose organization has been part of NASCAR for decades. To see the commissioner of the sport speak about him in that way crossed a line for many. The backlash spread quickly. Team owners questioned whether Phelps could continue to lead fairly. Sponsors quietly expressed concern about the damage to NASCAR's public image. Fans who already distrusted the charter system saw the messages as proof that leadership was disconnected from the people who built the sport. Even those who had defended Phelps in the past found it difficult to justify what had been exposed. Behind the scenes, NASCAR leadership faced a reality they could not escape. The lawsuit itself was damaging. The public texts made it worse. Every day the case remained active, more details threatened to surface. In the end, NASCAR moved to settle. The lawsuit was resolved before a final verdict, but the damage was done. Phelps's credibility had taken a hit that could not be repaired with a press release or apology. The trust between NASCAR and its teams was fractured. In early January 2026, NASCAR announced that Steve Phelps would step down as commissioner by the end of the month. The timing was no accident. The 2026 season was approaching fast. New sponsors, new schedules, and new partnerships were on the line. NASCAR needed to stop the bleeding and signal that change was coming. In public statements, NASCAR praised Phelps for his service. They highlighted his role in navigating the sport through the pandemic, expanding digital reach, and pushing diversity initiatives. Phelps himself thanked the organization and spoke about being proud of his time in leadership. But the subtext was clear. This was not a planned retirement. This was an exit forced by circumstance. Industry voices were blunt in their assessment. Some described Phelps's resignation as inevitable. Others argued it was only the first step in addressing deeper structural problems within NASCAR. The lawsuit may have ended, but the underlying issues had not disappeared. The charter system remains controversial. Revenue sharing is still a sore point, and the power imbalance between NASCAR and team owners continues to define the sport's future. Phelps's departure raised immediate questions. Who would replace him? Would NASCAR appoint another commissioner or quietly eliminate the role altogether? Could leadership rebuild trust with team owners after years of strained negotiations? For now, NASCAR has chosen an interim approach, redistributing responsibilities internally rather than naming a new commissioner immediately. That decision alone suggests uncertainty at the highest levels. For fans, the moment feels like a turning point. Steve Phelps represented modern NASCAR, corporate, centralized, and tightly controlled. His exit symbolizes the growing pushback against that model. Team owners want a louder voice. Drivers want clarity. Fans want transparency. The leaked texts did more than embarrass NASCAR leadership. They exposed a cultural divide, one where those in power spoke differently behind closed doors than they did publicly. That disconnect is what ultimately cost Phelps his position. In the long arc of NASCAR history, this episode will be remembered as more than just a resignation. It will be remembered as the moment when internal disputes became impossible to hide, when courtroom filings mattered more than press conferences, when the commissioner's own words turned against him. Steve Phelps did not leave NASCAR because of one bad decision. He left because the system he helped oversee reached a breaking point. The antitrust lawsuit forced accountability in a way internal meetings never could. The leaked messages erased plausible deniability and exposed how leadership truly viewed some of the people who helped to build the sport. Once those words were public, authority weakened instantly. Trust does not survive when respect disappears. And once that happened, there was no path forward that did not involve change at the top. NASCAR could defend policies, it could settle lawsuits, it could issue statements and promise improvement. What it could not do was pretend the relationship between leadership and teams was still intact. The credibility gap was too wide. NASCAR now stands at a crossroads. One path leads to surface-level adjustments, softer language, new talking points, different faces delivering the same decisions. That approach may buy time, but it does not solve the underlying problem. The other path is harder. It requires structural change, clearer revenue models, shared decision-making, and leadership that understands trust is built quietly and lost loudly. Steve Phelps's resignation closed one chapter, but it did not resolve the conflict that defined his final months in office. Team owners are still watching closely, sponsors are paying attention, fans are more aware than ever of how the sport operates behind closed doors. What comes next will define NASCAR for years to come, not just in boardrooms, but on the track itself. The only question is whether NASCAR has truly learned from what this moment exposed, or whether history is already preparing to repeat itself.